Hello all, let's learn regarding the white matter of the cerebrum. When we see the cerebrum, it is made up of outer-sided grey matter while the inner-sided white matter. This grey matter, which is situated outside the cerebral cortex, is nothing but it is the collection of the cell bodies of the neurons mainly, and the maximum number of the cell bodies within this outer part of the cerebral cortex, which makes the grayish in color, and that's why it is called as the gray matter of the cerebrum. While from there the axons are going to arise, and these axons, they are passes downward. It passes through the center part of the cerebrum, and that's why the central part of the cerebral hemisphere, it looks whitish in color, and that's why this area, it is called as the white matter of the cerebrum. So white matter consists of the axons of the neuron as well as the neuroglial cells. So the white matter of the cerebrum, it consists of number of axons, and this number of axons, they are connected either within the same hemisphere, either with the other hemisphere, or with the subcortical area or the spinal cord. And according to this connection, this white matter of the cerebrum can be divided into three types. Some axons of the neuron, they connect the nearby cerebral cortex area, and these fibers, they are present within the same hemisphere, and they connect these two different area of the same hemisphere, and this type of the fibers, these are called as the association fiber. This association type of the fibers, they are intrahemispheric fiber. While the second type of the white fibers, they are going to communicate the opposite side hemisphere, and they join the adjacent areas of the two different hemispheres like this. And these fibers, they are called as the commissural fibers. These commissural fibers, they are called the interhemispheric fibers. And the third type of this white matter of the cerebrum will connect the cortical area with the subcortical area, or from the cortical area to the spinal cord. And this type of the fibers, they are projecting to the subcortical area or to the spinal cord, and that's why this type of the fibers are called as the projection fibers. And this projection type of the fibers may be of two types depending upon its connection. If this projection type of the fibers, they go from the cerebral cortex to the subcortical area or to the spinal cord, this type of the fibers, they are called as the corticofugal fibers. And these corticofugal fibers, they are always efferent in nature, and so it is always motor. While the other four projection fibers, they come from the spinal cord or from the subcortical area to the cortex, and this type of the fibers, they are called corticopital fiber. And this corticopital type of the fibers, they are always afferent in nature, so they are always sensory. The tracts are the example of the projection fibers. Now let's see the association fibers in little bit detail. This is the horizontal section as well as the sagittal section of the brain. The association fibers may be of the two types depending upon the size of these fibers. Some fibers, they are going to hooking around the single sulcus, and they wrap and they connect the adjacent gyri, and this type of the association fibers, they are the short association fibers. And the short association fibers, they look U-shaped, and that's why they are called as the arcuate fibers. While the some association fibers, they connect the long distance situated gyri, and they will interconnect the widely separated gyrus, and this gyri and this type of the fibers, they are called as the long association fibers, and this long association fibers may connect the different lobe of the same hemisphere. So let's see some examples of the long association fibers. Some long association fibers will connect this motor speech area of the frontal cortex to the temporal lobe, and this type of the association fibers, they are called as the uncinate fasciculus. Some other long association fibers, they connect the cingulum with the parahippocampus, and they are going to encircle the corpus callosum like this. And this type of the fibers, they are making a full circle, and that's why this type of the long association fibers, they are called as the cingulum. The meaning of the cingulum, it is the girdle. Some other type of the long association fibers, they are present on just above the cingulum, and they are within the medial aspect of the hemisphere, and this type of the will connect the frontal lobe with the occipital lobe, and this type of the association fibers, these are the fronto-occipital. Such a same type of the long association fiber, just like fronto-occipital bundle, the other bundles are also present, and this bundle, they are situated on the superior side and they are running longitudinally, and these bundles, they are called as the superior longitudinal bundle. But the superior longitudinal bundle, they are placed more laterally and separated from this fronto-occipital bundle by the fibers of the corona radiata. So we can say from medial to lateral side, we can see the fronto-occipital bundle, and then we can see the fibers of the corona radiata, and then we can see the superior longitudinal bundle. Some other long association bundles are also there and named as the inferior longitudinal bundle, and for the viewing of this inferior longitudinal bundle, we have to remove brainstem as well as the cerebellum. And for that, let's see this schematic view of the cerebrum, and this type of the inferior longitudinal fasciculus, they are present and they are connecting the temporal lobe with the occipital lobe like this. And this type of the long association fibers are the inferior longitudinal fasciculus. Now let's see the commissural fibers. These commissural fibers interconnect the identical areas of the two cerebral hemisphere, and that's why we can say that these commissural fibers are interhemispheric fibers. The bundles of such fibers are called as commissure. The five types of the important commissural fibers are there in the brain, and these are corpus callosum, anterior commissure, posterior commissure, hippocampal commissure, and lastly habenular commissure. Out of these five, we are going to focus mainly on this corpus callosum. The corpus callosum is the largest commissure of the brain, connecting the cerebral cortex of the two cerebral hemispheres. So here in this figure, this is the anterior side and this one is the posterior side, and these two are the hemispheres which we have separated with our finger by keeping our fingers into the median longitudinal fissure, and we can see this white structure, it is the corpus callosum. Since it is going to connect the neocortex of both the hemispheres, that's why it is very large in size, and it contains around 300 millions of the neurons. The size of this corpus callosum, it is around 10 centimeter, and it is more nearer to the anterior side than that of the posterior side, and it is around 4 centimeter behind the frontal pole of the brain, while 6 centimeter in front of the occipital pole of the brain. So this corpus callosum, it is nearly the half of the anteroposterior diameter. When we take the sagittal section of the cerebrum and we separate both the hemisphere and view this hemisphere from the medial side, we can see this view. Here, this is the frontal pole of the brain, and here we can appreciate the occipital pole. And this structure which is present in a C-shaped manner, and this structure, it is the corpus callosum, and this is the largest commissure of the brain. So as we already discussed, this is around 10 cm in length and it is 4 cm from the frontal pole, while it is around 6 cm from the occipital pole. This corpus callosum connect all the part of the neocortex of both the hemisphere except this temporal part of this neocortex, which is going to communicate with the opposite sided temporal lobe with the anterior commissure. When we see the external features of this corpus callosum, we can appreciate this is the very massive and it is arched interhemispheric white matter bundles which is going to breach in the floor of the median longitudinal fissure and connecting both the medial surfaces of the cerebral hemisphere. Here the cavity just below the corpus callosum, it is the cavity of the lateral ventricle, and here just below it, this white matter bundle, it is the fornix, which is a part of the hippocampal commissure, and this corpus callosum inferior surface which is connected with this fornix by this septum, and this septum, it is septum pellucidum, which is broken down here to see the lateral ventricle. When we see the superior surface of this corpus callosum, we can see there is one gyrus, and this gyrus, it is the cingulate gyrus, and the sulcus between the two, the corpus callosum and the cingulate gyrus, this sulcus, it is called as the callosal sulcus. When we see this superior aspect of this corpus callosum, we can see two anterior cerebral arteries, they are going to pass on the backward side, and this arteries, they are the branches of the internal carotid artery. And when we see the other structures present on the superior surface of the corpus callosum, we find one very thin gray matter bundle, and this gray matter bundle, it is called as indusium graecium, which includes the bilateral medial and lateral longitudinal strias within it. So when we take this coronal section of this corpus callosum, we can see like this. These fibers are the corpus callosum. Here, this is the cerebral cortex, which is little bit widely separated here to see the structures on the superior surface of the corpus callosum. And here on the superior surface of this corpus callosum, we find the indusium graecium along with the bilateral medial and lateral longitudinal stria. Just above the indusium graecium, we find the anterior cerebral arteries of both the sides. And when we see the lower surface of this corpus callosum, we find the fornix, which is attached with the corpus callosum with the septum pellucidum. And on both the sides of the septum pellucidum, we find the lateral ventricle. So lateral ventricle, it is also in relation with the inferior surface of the corpus callosum. Now let's see the parts of the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum is divided into 4 parts from anterior to posterior side, and these parts are the rostrum, genu, body or trunk, and splenium. This genu, it is the thick anterior part of the corpus callosum which is situated around 4 cm behind this frontal pole of the cerebrum. This genu forms the anterior wall of the anterior horn of the lateral ventricle, and this genu is going to interconnect the fibers of the anterior part of the frontal lobe. And when we see this genu in the horizontal section here, this is the part of the genu, and the fibers from the genu, they are going to interconnect the anterior part of the frontal lobe, and they are forming a fork-like structure, and this fork-like structure, it is called as the forceps minor. This rostrum, it is the continuation of the genu, and it passes downward and backward and reach up to this area of the cerebrum called the lamina terminalis. This rostrum is going to form the floor of the anterior horn of the lateral ventricle, and the fibers from this rostrum will connect the orbital surfaces of the two frontal lobes. When we talk about the body or the trunk of the corpus callosum, it is the longest part of the corpus callosum, and it is the main part of the corpus callosum, and it is situated between the genu anteriorly and the thick posterior portion, that is planium, posteriorly. The fibers of the body, they are going to connect the most of the frontal lobe of the cerebrum as well as the anterior part of the parietal lobe of the brain. This body of the corpus callosum, it forms the roof of the central part of the lateral ventricle. And when we see the horizontal section of this brain, we can appreciate that the fibers of this body, which is up to here, they are crossing and joining the two frontal lobes as well as the anterior part of the parietal lobes. When we see this planium, it is the thickest part of the corpus callosum, which is situated on the posterior side, and it is nearly 6 cm in front of the occipital pole. The fibers of this planium, they interconnect the posterior part of the parietal lobe as well as the temporal lobe and the occipital lobe of the brain of the both the sides. When we see the horizontal section of this brain, we can see this area, it is of this planium, and the fibers from this planium, it passes backward and downward and forming a large fork-like structures, and these structures are called as the forceps major. The fibers of this forceps major, they are going to make a bulb. They are going to push on the medial wall of the posterior horn of the lateral ventricle, and this bulging in the medial wall of the posterior horn of the lateral ventricle, it is called as the bulb of the posterior horn. One more word is there, that is the tapetum, and to understand the word tapetum, we have to orient with the structures within the horizontal section. So here in this horizontal section of the brain, this is the body of the corpus callosum, and here this is the thalamus on each side of the lateral ventricle, and this nuclei, it is the lentiform nucleus. This is also lentiform nucleus, and here this is the caudate nucleus, which is the head of the caudate nucleus, and the gap here within this area, it is filled by the internal capsule, and this internal capsule having the convexity towards the medial side, and this internal capsule, it is nothing but it is the compact bundle of the ascending and the descending tract from the spinal cord or the subcortical area to the brain, or from the cerebrum to the subcortical area or to the spinal cord. So we can say this internal capsule, it is the bundle, it is the compact bundle of the ascending and the descending tracts. And after passing from this narrow space between the thalamus and the caudate nucleus medially, and the lentiform nucleus laterally, this internal capsule, it is going to fan out and form the corona radiata. So after having this knowledge of the internal capsule and the corona radiata, we can imagine that the fibers of the corpus callosum, which are going to connect both the sided hemisphere, they are going to intersect the corona radiata. But some fiber of the posterior part of the body of the corpus callosum as well as the splenium of the corpus callosum, they are not going to intersect by these corona radiata fibers, and these fibers, they are called as the tapetum. These fibers of the tapetum, they are going to form the roof and the lateral wall of this posterior horn of the lateral ventricle, as well as these are also going to form the lateral wall of the inferior horn of the lateral ventricle. Now let's see the function of the corpus callosum. This corpus callosum is largely responsible for interhemispheric transfer of information, which is essential for the bilateral responses and in the learning processes. However, the congenital absence or the surgical removal of this corpus callosum does not produce any change in personality or intellectual level of the patient, and the patient remains completely unnoticed of any definite neurological disorder in day-to-day life. And in this case of the surgical removal or the congenital absence of the corpus callosum, each cerebral hemisphere becomes isolated and patient responds as he or she has two separate brains, and this condition, it is called as the split brain syndrome. In case of the surgical severance of this corpus callosum in case of monkeys, in the experimental basis, we find the monkey is not able to perform a task with the other hand, which it is usually trained with the opposite hand. The section of the corpus callosum in past has been attempted surgically to prevent the spread of the severe epileptic seizures from one hemisphere to the other hemisphere, which is nowadays it is obsolete. So this is all about the corpus callosum.